Welcome to Cultural Catalyst, the podcast that shines a light on the creative visionaries working behind the scenes in arts and entertainment. I'm your host, Alison McNeil, CEO and founder of McNeil Creative Enterprises. With over 20 years of experience advocating for equity and sustainable growth in the arts and entertainment, I've seen firsthand the power of the behind-the-scenes creatives. Here on Cultural Catalyst, the creatives behind the curtain take center stage. Let's celebrate the people who make the magic happen. Let's dive in. Hey there. Before we dive into this episode, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the shifts in our arts and cultural landscape since these conversations were first recorded. We've seen the challenges to institutions, including the arts, but we also have seen the resilience of creatives and cultural organizations. If you believe in the power of the arts, now is the time to take action. Support the artists and arts organizations that inspire you. Donate, amplify their work, and stay engaged. Visit Americans for the Arts to stay updated on advocacy efforts happening on Capitol Hill and across the country. Americans for the Arts provides resources and opportunities to get involved at the local, state, and national levels. We'll link their website in the show notes and continue sharing updates on our MCE Instagram. As the legendary Carrie Mae Weems reminds us, art is the one place we all turn to for solace, and we need that now more than ever. Let's show up for the arts, for our communities, and for each other. Now, let's get into this episode. I'm excited to welcome my guest, Aja Burrell Wood. Aja Burrell Wood is the managing director of the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. She's also a renowned ethnomusicologist, curator, and educator. With a deep focus on the intersections of race, gender, and performance, she has curated transformative programs and initiatives that amplify the voices of women in jazz. Aja's work bridges academia and performance, while shedding light on underrepresented stories in the music industry. Welcome to the show, Aja.
Wow, what a lovely introduction. Thank you so much for that. I am a joyful and enthusiastic ethnomusicologist, and I'm grateful for any success I've had in that area.
To hear it, and I love to see it. I'm excited to have you on the show today and have you share your journey with our listeners, those that know about your work, those that may not be familiar with what it means to be an ethnomusicologist, and those that are just interested in why you do what you do. So I'm going to say, ethnomusicology seems like a fascinating blend of music and culture.
Sometimes it sounds like a made-up job, but it is a real job. And I think incredible one. I mean, it's a discipline area, right? In music scholarship. I myself did not know, I hadn't even heard that word, right, in high school back in the 1900s. Although obviously the discipline existed, but I had no exposure to that. I was intensely in music. And that's what's interesting too, because even when you are intensely in music, even you as a young person with hopes and dreams and aspirations, which I did have towards the arts, I wouldn't have known of all of the possibility of that discipline and also the entire ecosystem, right, of arts and culture in the United States, but also worldwide. Like, how do things work? And even in college, had not known. It is something that I came to in somewhat a serendipitous manner after my time in college at the incredible Howard University.
I'm saying that. We're not going to go back and forth with Hampton, the real HU.
Listen, I am a full supporter, joy, and enthusiast over historically Black colleges and universities.
That's right. That's right.
The games and stuff are fun, but we know it's all family. And every institution is important. So it was after, and I knew that, and my background is in violin performance. At Howard, I did both a business track as well as a violin performance track. So international business marketing, as well as, violin performance. And I was taking every opportunity. I think DC, it was so great to be a young person at that time in the nation's capital because you have your college and you have your university, right, which is your campus, but the capital also becomes your classroom, much like I know, students that are, our students here at Berklee, Boston area is also the classroom. Anybody that's going to college in New York, those are some of the benefits of going to a city school. So I was also able to do internships at the President's Committee of Arts and Humanities, even learning what that was at the time, volunteer, and then also gain some great early arts administration exposure and experiences at the Patricia M. Sitar Center for the Arts, which was not far from Howard's campus, but also close to a dorm that was near the Adams Morgan neighborhood. And so that also spurred those questions. But I also had the opportunity to study abroad while I was a student at Howard in Japan and studied Japanese, although it's so rusty now. After I graduated, I was a participant in what is called the JET program. So I was then immediately went back to Japan and was teaching English in the school systems there. And of course, I'm taking it as an opportunity to even immerse myself more, learn more than I had. And being a string player, I love strings of all over the world. I mean, I love music, right? But I had been kind of getting into koto and shamisen music, and I happened to come across that. I mean, I happened to make a friend who played the koto and also then kind of taught me some things and then would even introduce me to her teacher. And so that spurred a lot of thinking about even more about music and culture and the arts in non-Western cultures and communities across the world, because it's something that if it is touched upon in one's music education in the West, at least then. It's changed much more now, but it would have been a little marginal in a way if you got exposed to it at all. But of course, being African American, I absolutely had exposure to music and culture and community, and being from Detroit, Michigan, of course, and always in Black community through where I was and also through family and all of that, of course. So there was an appreciation there, but I hadn't had a word or a framework to understand the questions that were just continually rising until I watched, and this is now some years after my time at Howard and also having returned back to the DC area, I came across a documentary, Mandla, Revolution of Four-Part Harmony, which focused on music and how music was used to mobilize, right? And in the liberation movement of the anti-apartheid movement, which of course I had familiarity with, because similarly in the civil rights movement and how music was utilized and functioned in service to that movement. But because of that documentary, I just started to add more questions. And the internet is now more, searchable at that time than it ever was before. And so I'm looking up stuff because I'm just curious. I even went to my local public library because I'm trying to see, well, I was always a nerd. And I stumbled across one writing, and and unfortunately, I can't even remember who the author was, but it had when I was looking, who is this person? Because I was appreciating the content, and that person was an ethnomusicologist. I'm like, what is that? What is that? What do you mean? And I started looking that up, and I was a fundraiser. I was an early fundraiser at this time, just starting my career. And a wonderful organization, Food and Friends, which still exists and does great work in the DC area surrounding providing nutrition and services and meal services to people living with HIV, AIDS, and other life-threatening illnesses. But it was really a wonderful experience because I was starting to gain nonprofit and fundraising skills. But my heart was still in music. So I'm looking all this stuff up and I'm like, what is that? So I'm on my lunch break, onto the side searching, and I start to see that there are programs and there are graduate degrees, and there's even this thing called Society of Ethnomusicology. And I'm like, that's when I kind of off to the side, I was starting to plan to submit applications. And luckily, a University of Maryland had a program, so it wasn't even that far from where I was. And even though I was thinking I might go to law school or going down that track, but my heart wasn't. The more I learned about ethnomusicology, the more was the gravitational pull. And simply about it, ethnomusicologists do and have done a wide variety of things, and we are mostly concerned with music and culture for sure, but it's people, right? And what people do with the music surrounding music making, what we make it mean, meaning and significance, continuity and change, music as culture, music as cultural process. And so you're also going to get training in anthropology as well in that training and preparation in our programs. There are tools that we are getting from anthropology, from sociology, from history. So ethnomusicology is inherently interdisciplinary. We are utilizing all those things, all of that framework and practice as well, and methodologies such as ethnography, and to arrive at our ultimate goals in seeking understanding about music and meaning within its cultural, social, historical, economic, all of that impact. And so some ethnomusicologists might choose to decide that they want to look at Hawaiian mele or some other Afro-Cuban drumming or Russian balalaika, Balinese gamelan, or particular eras, or a multitude of ways that you can slice and dice that, as well as, of course, as academics tend to do, particularly in the humanities. Of course, we teach, we write, we research, but there's also a lot of applied work. And so a lot of what I do, and even now, up till now, is currently as managing director of the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, which is founded by Terry Lynn Carrington in 2018. So we're relatively new. It informs that my current practices as well.
Wow. I heard so many things that like sparked additional questions because that's how it goes, right? But the first thing that stuck out to me when you were talking about how you navigated it was that you had access and you were surrounded by opportunities to just follow your curiosity. And I think that that is such a rich opportunity, right? Like one, that you have it, and then two, that you can do it because that's not necessarily afforded to everyone. And the ability to be able to do it in DC, have your background from Detroit, then go abroad, like that's
Yeah.
incredible. And I'd always wonder, especially when we're talking about creative careers, how people get there, because there's not necessarily anybody on the bullhorn talking about ethnomusicology is something that you can study and become. And I think that the interdisciplinary way the way you describe the interdisciplinary nature of the work made me think of my own work through sociology and research and like the systems that contribute to how we access culture and how and who preserves it. It's interesting, right? Like you mentioned jazz as a focus of the work that you're doing now. I heard violin and somehow I thought about classical music. Would you say that those are the two genres that you've spent the most of your time in?
Yes. So again, going back to Detroit, Michigan,
The
and
D.
I
Sorry.
know, and also just being in Black community, my training absolutely was in classical, right? I'm classically trained, at the same time, I grew up in a community where things weren't so separate. And I think that is indicative of Black community in general. So it's not classical music is happening over here and gospel is over here and jazz.
Mm,
I'm also of a hip hop generation, right? Like it's all
okay.
happening. Marching band culture, like it's
Uh-huh.
all there. So Yeah, am I playing in church sometimes? Yeah, when I start to take my earliest $5 gigs and I'm, say, doing weddings, and it is a wedding that is a couple that is also in Black community. I mean, do you know how many requests I'm going to get for Anita Baker, Sweet Love?
Right, right.
And so I was never a jazz player. I was never a jazz player. I came into jazz in my professional life. At the same time, I have excellent jazz musicians in my family across generations as well. And actually, I was just sharing a story with Terry Lynn Carrington this week, actually, about how I'll say jazz gave me my violin, my first violin,
Mm.
because my great aunt Odessa,
Shout out to
got to
Aunt Des.
and, my father's side of the family, which she was based, had always been in Houston, as my dad always was, in my lifetime in Houston. So I would also spend my summers in Houston. Aunt Jess noticed, as a great aunt would, that I think I was around like 8, and, it got to her that baby was into the music. I had a violin access to a violin through my elementary school, and that was kind of right before they started taking the arts out. And I just didn't put it down. Like, I did not put it down, but it was still something I had to, like, borrow from the school, bring back. And I didn't have access to an instrument at home. We wouldn't have been able to afford that. And so Aunt Des had a good friend in her church. Skeets Talbert was actually his name. And so they're congregation members, and I will share a little bit here about Skeets, but he was a clarinetist, saxophonist, vocalist. He also had performed with, like, Fats Waller, all of that. And he was also a professor in Houston, I believe at the University of Houston, and he had a music store, but he was retired. So he was already an elder, and he hooked it up because apparently he still had instruments left over from his former music store. And even though he was retired, and I remember my dad and I going over to his house, and the garage door lifted up, and it was just full of, like, music instruments and equipment. And, like, for my little 7, 8-year-old self, I'm like, I'm in Disneyland. And then I see those two Black men, go off to the side. They're talking, and I guess they're negotiating. I think they probably arrived because I found an instrument, because he did have a violin. And luckily, I had very long arms, so I could already do a full size instrument. And I think they negotiated $200. And that's how I got my first instrument that I could have myself, and now have access to an instrument at home. All of that came through community, right? And that was and he was a jazz musician. But that, to me, is also indicative of how Black community can function, because he was just making sure that a young person in his community had access to an instrument just because they loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And he could see that, nothing needed to be explained. And then I was looking too, and he had a few books, a few, like, starter books, maybe some Suzuki stuff or whatever. And I was just looking at them. He was like, "You want those too?" And I was like, "Mm-hmm." And he was like, "Okay, I'll throw those in too." And I couldn't even comprehend who he was as a musician and educator. I was a child. And then later on, I'm looking back, and actually, when I'm even in my ethnomusicology programs, and I start to ask my family, I'm like, wait a minute, how did he just have, because it was just normal. Then they're telling me, and unfortunately, he had not passed not too long after I started asking those questions. But that was something I'm so grateful that happened, that look at all of that coordination and across states, right?
Yes.
So yes, so all of the music was always around. I was on my track, of course, in terms of the classical music training, but it was never presented to me, or I never understood that what I was doing was separate from these other forms of, and particularly Black music. At the same time, I think, I've been working professionally in jazz for over 10 years now, maybe 12, 30, I can't remember, and that has been a joy of my career, but it has been in service, to jazz, not me as a jazz musician.
Again, I'm just thinking it is such a gift to see and be surrounded by people that see you and create opportunities for you just for your own enjoyment and because they are inviting you to follow your curiosity and they're making it possible. I just got chills just thinking about that happening in your life and how that sparked the next step, which sparked the next step which sparked the next step all the way to finding what ethnomusicology is and then deciding to do it. And I don't know, I'm gonna say maybe ethnomusicology chose you and you didn't even like it was like all around the path took you there and you're like, oh, this is like gratifying. I don't know. Would you say you would agree? You would agree?
I mean, I could consider that. I mean, in especially in the way that I do believe, what you seek seeks you. And also, I appreciate that in you highlighting curiosity. And I have always been an intensely curious person from childhood. I wanted to understand things, how things worked. My chosen path, becomes music. I'm also a kid that was asking my mom for science experiments and rock tumblers, books for my friends, and I would just go through encyclopedia by encyclopedia, just one by one. I wanted to know, I wanted to learn, and I absolutely was encouraged to be curious, to have my imagination. It was absolutely nurtured, as well as discipline. Absolutely. I was in a household, we couldn't bring home any C's. And that was just, it wasn't if you go to college, it was when you go to college that. So absolutely benefited from that. I was raised also around educators, so I think that that was a part of it. So yes, very, very lucky in many ways in that regard, and also being in Black community in the way that I was. And I'm not saying that as it was a bed of roses or anything. Like, there was other things as well, but those were the things that I absolutely benefited from and had the privilege of having access to, on top of having adults that instilled, in you a pride of who you are, who we are, and honor and respecting that. So that, of course, then gives me the understanding and framework that all cultures, all communities, right? Also, we need to be affirming that, honoring that, celebrating that. Yes, but it was a curiosity, and many, many, many points. It was even when I had I'm a planner. I'm an extreme planner. At the same time, I definitely was open all the time to things that I had not known yesterday. But even in some of those moments, did I know what I was doing? In some ways, I did know what I was doing. And then there's that in the middle, because mind you, and this is back when I think Netflix we were still getting the DVDs in the mail.
Yes.
I think that's what it was, because I remember it was a physical media. I wasn't watching Amandla online or anything like that. So that means that I had identified and rented it, right? So it was active, right?
You're like, I want to see that. Well, I want to give flowers to the names that I've heard you mention and then ask if there are any others. Mr. Skeet, Aunt Odessa, your father, your friend that introduced you to her teacher that helped you learn about.
Yes, my mother absolutely nurtured my creativity. She herself had a musical background as a pianist, although I would have never heard her play, because somewhere between her college years and my existence, she pivoted, but she also, like, I learned how to read before I went to school, before I was in kindergarten, because her mother, and my grandmother, was an educator. But also, when the music stuff started to appear, she was absolutely right by me, helping me learn how to read musical notation. So even though she wasn't playing at that time, that she still had that skill set enough. And so she wouldn't have pushed against me pursuing any of that. So my mother, Linda Laverne Wood, my father, Marilyn Burrell, and also incredibly important, Diane Reeves. Diane Reeves is my cousin and also shows up in my life. well, cousin, I mean, auntie, big sis, good friend, major part of my support system. I can't even enumerate or vocalize to the magnitude of that. And that's saying something because I'm a long distance yapper. I usually don't have trouble finding words, but I'm just saying. And, also in our family, although I only was ever able to meet him, I think once or twice before he passed, is, George Duke. And also one of my cousins also, who's still hanging, still swinging, Charles Burrell, who is, ooh, yeah, so he should be about 105 right now, bass player. Also from the Detroit area. And in fact, we would have went to the same high school, Cass Tech. This also
Cass Tech. I've heard of that.
but he would have gone, I think, around the 30s, and
Okay.
and I'm of course several decades later than that. And if you read, you can in his musical journey, he was both equally adept and talented in classical and jazz, and had a lot of desire for classical music. And at the same time, his or some of his earliest teacher was teaching him in the correct fingering position on purpose, because as a Black man, that teacher felt that he should not be playing classical, he should be playing jazz. Now, like I said, he very talented and masterful and adept in both, but that is also that reality. So by the time I am several decades later in high school, and at the same high school, and Detroit continues to be the very, 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 very Black city. I wasn't facing that in that regard. It was still there. I mean, not in the city, but outside of the context. But I did not have to face what he did, of course. And yeah, so those are also some of the very, very many names that come up. And then there's more. I had tons of amazing educators, and I was actually just at a panel that was organized by Ash Gordon of Castle of Our Skins.
Yes.
And we were celebrating on the life and works of Julia Perry as a Black woman composer who was also disabled. And so we were kind of going through all of that. And what came up there is, some of this I might be misremembering, but basically what was coming up in that, or connected to a previous conversation, was that some educators can be on your launching pad and some educators can be a brick wall. I've had both. I've had both. Everybody has, right?
Mhm.
But I'm thankful that overall I've had more launching pads than brick walls.
And that is a gift. That is a gift. And even as you had the walls, you had enough surrounded around you to let that be a part of the journey, but not have you stuck in that place. Because, working in the music industry is not is not easy. Any industry, but the music industry, it's so important to be surrounded by what I call earth angels that help
Mhm.
you navigate this life. And when you mention that music is music. Maybe we don't think jazz, classical. It's music wherever it comes from, and all of it is informed by somewhere. I always say back to Africa, but it's like the journey and the people that you were surrounded by, and even the fact that it was in school. That
Mhm.
almost they made it like okay. Like I did dance and singing when I was in elementary school, and I remember very vividly doing the shows and how much joy it brought us, and how some students that maybe didn't want to be in the math class and
Mhm.
those arts classes, they were thriving. Um,
Mhm.
and I always think about who gets access to what and how do people find their way on these paths. So thank you so much for sharing that and for giving flowers to those people that helped you. I always think about all the work that I do is in honor and in service to my elders,
Mhm.
now many ancestors, which is crazy to even think about. And yeah, lifting their names up because of them, we are, right? Huh. Well, I just keep getting chills. Okay.
Listen, I'm currently in a job that literally did not exist before I had this role, right? At an institute that did not exist. So I definitely had the idea And in my, my family, and I think this is also in community, comes up, Diane says this all the time, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. I had definitely that idea that I was also needing to prepare myself for an opportunity that didn't even exist yet. But what was I going to need? I was going to need business acumen. I was going to need music acumen. I was going to,
You're saying you instinctively knew that you were preparing for something, but you didn't know.
yes, I was going to need chops in fundraising, philanthropy. And then, of course, that was also a part of my ethnomusicological journey, and that I wanted to gain an expertise. I wanted also that as a core competency and foundation for my approach, right? So I wanted to have those things. And I had some ideas about the types of positions and roles. Like, of course, I knew I was going to teach and things like that. But I also knew that something might eventually come up that just literally I can't even imagine right now. And so also lifting up the name of my boss, who has also been a great impact and mentor, Terry Lynn Carrington,
Yes.
who's also her journey is just incredible. Terry Lynn is a jazz musician, drummer, producer, composer, arts leader, visionary, and she is and Black woman. I want to say that as well. She is the first woman to ever receive a Grammy in the category of Best Jazz Instrumental. And that was not even too long ago, which shows you where this inequity is. Or just highlighting some of that about 2014, 2015. At the same time, and she's from the greater Boston area, she would have started to begin her time at Berklee at the age of 11. So she was also prodigious. And I would say she's your favorite drummer, but it's also just extremely multifaceted. And so now, and also, like I said, visionary and thought leader. And at the Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, we advocate, support, mentor, recruit young artists, typically seeking careers in jazz, but not only jazz, right? Jazz is also a lens. And we do that with the idea of racial equity and gender equity and more as guiding principles in the work we do. So we are seeking to transform the sets of conditions that create the inequity in the first place. And we're serving across gender, across all identities. It is entirely an inclusive environment. And we have a lot of what we do here on campus, but we're also very front facing as well. And that is, again, to address, even in the arts, I think sometimes people, and you probably also experience this, as people think, we have those fun jobs. We every day it's shiny, happy, creative. And in many ways, it could be one of the hardest, one of the most rigorous paths that one could take. And yes, there is inequity and issues over here that can erase some of our most important creators out of history. Because why do we have to uplift Julia Perry now? In some ways, because she hasn't been, or like Mary Lou Williams, who's actually now far, far, far much better in that, people's whose names we still don't even know, while also creating arduous, unnecessary inequity for those who are seeking paths, who have the talent, who have also the grit, the discipline, the will, how, and their voices are not in the room. They are so many barriers of entry and systems of oppression, because we are literally not hearing and valuing everybody that has something to give. So Terry, through her journey and also being an educator and also listening to student concerns here at Berklee, and those young artists around her, because she's always mentoring, always has been, and teaching, was now in a place of her career where she was able to, from a leadership position and a position of power.
And we know that that's what's necessary. Position, like being positioned in the place where you can. And, one of the things that you mentioned, I actually watched, and that's that panel that you mentioned about Julia Perry with Ash and Castle of Our Skins. I'm connected to Ash through a grant funding program in Boston through the Barr Foundation. But one of the things that I feel like definitely connects to what I hear you talking about now, and it's a really great segue. You mentioned in that on that panel who you knew about and where you found out about them, and you kept saying something like, "I was angry because it wasn't there," and it turned into righteous rage, and that stuck out for me.
And I say that too because sometimes this is some gendered stuff too. I
Mhm.
because I don't know that I was totally raised to embrace anger. It was
I think that's a generational thing.
I think it's generational. I think it's gendered. I think I remember, I know this is a little sidestep, but walk with me here. I used to love that movie Drew Barrymore was in as a child, Firestarter. She's not too much older than me, so I would have been a little girl watching a little girl. And I don't even know that I totally really understood what the movie was. It's just that now in hindsight, I'm like, oh, that was also a depiction of a little girl who had anger. Now, of course, also the power to start fire.
Right, that part.
What stood out to me about that? And I was like, oh, sometimes little girls do have things that they are angry about and they have reason to be. It was not an
Mhm.
emotion that was totally encouraged to like identify and vocalize. So I think
Right.
also when I'm now full grown, when I'm saying and identifying places where my anger exists also racially as a Black woman, I think sometimes we can be very, hyper aware and hyper vigilant that our passion can come off as angry Black woman. And so
Mhm.
sometimes you could even be tone policing yourself, even unconsciously, right? To try to avoid that perception, which is not something that I care about now.
I hear you.
I want to acknowledge the intersection of that, right? So the point to which I am, which I am at, the story was when I was at Howard University and taking Blacks in the Arts by the late great Professor Selman. In that class, at one point, we were learning about William Grant Still, and I had this moment as, am I 18 at this time? And it's like, wait a minute, what is a Black composer and also being, classical, right? Being classically trained. This is my steez. And I'm from a Black community. I'm right. I also had Black teachers and conductors and things like that. So, and hadn't come up yet. And I'm like, nobody told me, I kind of took it personal, but also I was grateful coming across that. And there was many, many, right, more people that we explored, which were a discovery for me, even though I'm coming from a highly musical city, highly Black. There's still all the things don't come to you at the time. I'm learning about Florence Price a little bit later than that, Mary Lou Williams a little bit later than that, on and on and on. And of course, I know I will still be learning people as long as I live. But my panelist, I really appreciated that he had said
Rooted in love. Your anger is rooted in love.
anger is rooted in love. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad I've been thinking about that
Yes.
because where that anger comes up are in areas that I love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Mm-hmm.
love music because it's humanity. Because I love people, I love culture, I love my people, I love my community. I love the people who make music possible, our artists. Like I think even when I was kind of consciously starting to decide that, because there was a moment where I was like not sure if I was gonna go any further in terms of performance versus something like, ethnomusicology or music business or arts administration. But I think what came down to me, I also not only go in the directions of my curiosity, I also most likely go in the directions of which I am most compelled. I was compelled more so that there be a stage and to make sure that is always there, then I was compelled to be on the stage and also make whatever I can do to make possible for those who want the stage, at which we want that because we all benefit, society benefits from what artists have to do and share and create with themselves and ourselves. And I knew so many people don't have that. And that is not okay. So maybe I could do something about that. That's kind of a part of what contributed to how I crafted my career.
That's exactly what came to me when I heard that phrase and what you said as you were building up to the conversation. And you're right. When a gentleman that was sitting next to you said, it's anger rooted in love, I see what you knew was missing, what you found that was missing in your journey, and how you now, full circle, now you are helping to make sure that those names are uplifted. When I think about not, going from a place where you see someone doing it, so you know it's possible, to you doing it, to you through your work addressing the things that you knew maybe didn't exist for you, that's another gift, right? And I guess I wonder, when you think about all that your hands have touched, which creative endeavors have filled your heart with joy and or pride, like, or even made a lasting impact?
Just being able to be working from the ground up, right? Institution building. The answer is what I'm doing. There's many, many things I could point to before this,
Mm-hmm.
but what I'm doing now together with Terry and our team, which also includes Chris Davis, Linda Mahon O, Edmar Cologne, also Hallie Elwell, Will Smith. I mean, so many. Matthew Stevens, I also want to say. The work that I'm up to now. Also, we're just coming, I can't even say off of a major project, but actually, as you might have seen in DC, which is a really cool full circle moment. Terry also curated an exhibit, and we've been in that space over the last 3 or 4 years, the New Standards exhibit, and where we are, and she is, from a standpoint of a curator, asking the question that we ask in our institute as well, is what would jazz sound like, look like, or any of this in a world, right, where patriarchy doesn't exist? What does that look like? What would jazz sound like in a culture without patriarchy, and performed on a stage without that, right? And in an environment of radical inclusion. She's doing that through a multimedia art exhibit, which includes visual art, painting, photography, sculptures, also audio, visual, film, things that we pulled from archives. It's at Arena Stage, and it's through the partnership with the DC Jazz Fest. It's been really, really incredible. We launched at the DC Jazz Fest at Labor Day weekend, and it's free and open to the public. So please, for those in the DC area, please do attend, which also provides another point of access. Like, you shouldn't have to only learn this stuff in class or be able to engage with this in elite institutions or some places where that is inaccessible for a lot of people. And it first launched at the Carr Center, also a partner of ours in Detroit, Michigan. Last summer, we had it in Boston at Arts Emerson, who was a partner of ours there. And this year, it is in DC, and it has been incredible to see the legs that has, and will continue to do so. And like I said, those are some full circles. So when we launched in Detroit, to be able to be a part of bringing this exhibit and this project that is rich, and we also produced several jazz shows around the city and did so last year too. So it's always connected to performance. But to be able to be a part in bringing that type of project to the city that raised me, that built me, that where the first formulations in my little Asia's brain, and then I can contribute to my city. That was great. And also now in DC as well, that also was really important and impactful for my journey, and I felt supported, right? And as we were pointing out, and to be able to have a hand in bringing that too, and even was able to have a few Howard University students who actually helped come in and helped us in the installation process, simply because we needed a few more hands on deck. They were freshmen and sophomores, and to be able to also have that, provide that opportunity for them. So great. I just keep going.
You're going to be a part of their narrative when they're talking about what their journey was like. That one time when I volunteered to help.
Yes, because I'm able to pay it forward in the way that it was paid forward for me. I try my best to do that, because I would not be able to repay a Skeets Talbert. How could I? Or my other educators, mentors in and outside of my family, they also modeled for me what that looks like.
Well, this is a really good time to ask you, like, what ripple effect do you dream of creating through your work? Like, what do you hope happens because your work existed?
Well, on individual, maybe impact. I mean, of course, I'm an educator. Any educator, even if our time with the student is often actually just so brief in their journey, I hope every student I've ever had and never will have, I hope that whatever I was able to provide where we were encountering each other in education, I hope they knew more than they did. I hope they started to see more possibilities than they did. I hope I've been able to contribute to their individual paths, and that's whether they are or are not artists. That's always going to be. And that doesn't just exist for the young people that I come across in my classroom. That's also the young people in my community. I do hope for a really lovely retirement. Definitely do at some point. Although I probably won't ever stop on some level, but I do hope in my career to also be able to impact national policy on the arts is absolutely a hope and a goal of mine. I think which will also end up being some full circle with how I used to be an intern, the President's Committee of the Arts and Humanities, but in what ways, what policies can impact for the good, our citizens who are artists, right? Because we benefit, the nation benefits from that, culture benefits from that. And what are some of those things, what are some of those policies that can create even so much as better social safety nets for
Mhm.
creative path? Also impact on local culture, local city to state, and then of course, national, engage, encourage, and create great infrastructure so that we have the arts thriving in city to city, town to town. Right. And we've had that in different ways historically. I want that to be continue, right? Detroit has a scene. We know New Orleans, many eras, and not just eras, right? Of course, Nashville, but we've also seen amazing things come out of Minneapolis, come out of Kansas City, and yes, of course, New York and LA, but I don't want us to lose our regional culture. And then, of course, all the culture and community that exists here in the United States. I would like to be able to have that impact in my career before I'm retiring and maybe gardening and maybe hopefully raising a few chickens.
You know what? And I believe it's going to happen. You're already on the path, and I cannot wait to see how it continues to unfold. I mean, what I'm hearing you say is, showing up for those that are coming behind you, creating space for there to be policy and structure to make this work sustainable. And that's something that's just kind of on the side. And I think about how your elders, some ancestors poured into you, and your commitment to do the same for the future. It is the, like you said, the pay it forward way of being, and each one teach one, right? Okay, last question. For someone that wants to do what you do,
Hmm.
what are the keys to open that door? Like, it seems like there are so many different ways you could get to your path, or
You are going to want to have a strong performance background of some sort. Now, that can look like, oh, so many different things. So, my colleagues, we come from several different types of musical backgrounds. It's not the same. It's not necessarily the same, right? Which is fine. Ethnomusicology doesn't require one particular type of narrow musical background. So yeah, maybe it's classical, but maybe your background actually is in Afro-Cuban drumming and you're coming from that, or from the Black church, or like my friend Takako, who is Nishibori, who is still a koto player, right? Like, so that's all valid. Yes, you're going to want your undergraduate degree, and it doesn't have to be necessarily one particular thing, but things that firm up that performance, humanities, liberal arts. But of course, I actually had business that helped. And then you're going, at least stateside, I can, advise from that you are going to want to look at the programs that exist for anybody out there. I would actually absolutely recommend looking up Society of Ethnomusicology. There is a a website, and you're going to go to literally ethnomusicology.org. You can learn a lot there. You might also find names and works of people that inspire you. What are they doing? Where are they affiliated with different schools? Which ones are those? Read their work. And that'll start to help you identify and craft that path for yourself. Find us. I'm literally on my way to have a meeting with a student here at Berklee today that's interested in the path. And that student I would say, has done a really great job of identifying, taking initiative, connecting with me, finding time on my calendar. So you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to do that level of follow through. And I also say, continue to show up in your life, be open to things that you do not know. So you don't have to get ready. No path is easy. All paths require work, disciplined, all of that. You're not going to get time management. You're not going to get around that. You don't have to be perfect. None of us ever are or will be, but you do have to build those muscles, and then you can go from there.
Oh my goodness, Aja Burrell Wood, thank you so much. People want to stay in contact or at least learn more about the Institute, whatever you'd like to share with people to keep in touch. What are those?
You can find us at Berklee, obviously berkeley.edu/jazz-gender-justice. But so that's a little bit, yeah, but you can find us there. And you can also find us another way, just through social media, our Instagram, Facebook, and on our Instagram, we have our link tree up that we are often updating with what we're up to. That's one way to engage. And I would also welcome people, for my players out there, my educators out there. We also have a publication, New Standards, 101 Compositions by Women Composers. And this is across generations, I think, of women composers, from Lil Hardin Armstrong, right, down to even 3 of those compositions would have been of students of ours as well. That's because a lot of times what we understand are jazz standards, or have been conferred that title, often is not unfortunate. It's still fortunate, because these composers are incredible and amazing, but there is absolutely inequity in that they would be mostly composed by men. And that's not because men were the only ones composing, not because these women didn't exist, right? So that, it's the first of its kind. And when Terry also wanted Grammy again, along with Chris Davis and Linda Mahon O, when they recorded 10 of those tunes out of that book. Also, the New Standards, called New Standards, and that also won a Grammy, then making Chris Davis and also Linda Mahon O amongst the next women after Terry to win in a particular category. So, and it's a great album. So that's some ways that you can stay engaged.
Any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience?
Go and be great. Create community that is meaningful to you. Continue to show up in that community as others showed up for you, because it is reciprocity. And yeah, walk boldly towards your dreams. You're capable of more than you know.
Thank you so much for joining us. For those listeners that want to hear more, be sure to check out our show notes, where we will list all of the areas that Aja was happy to share with us. Thank you. Until next time, or like I like to say, until soon. Thank you for tuning in to Cultural Catalyst. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us for more inspiring stories from the world of arts and entertainment. You can find me on social media at MCEArts and Alison T. McNeil on LinkedIn. Please leave a review and tune in to our next episode for more creatives behind the curtain. See you next time.